The city street was loud. It was always loud. Cars roared by, honking their horns. People shouted to be heard over the noise. The air smelled like exhaust fumes and old garbage. But for 10-year-old Toby, none of that mattered right now. His whole world was focused on the other side of a thick pane of glass. He stood very still on the sidewalk. His shoes were falling apart. The soles were peeling away from the fabric, and his toes pushed against the material, trying to find room. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other to ease the ache in his heels. His pants were too short, showing his ankles, and his faded blue flannel shirt was thin against the cool autumn wind. But he didn't feel the cold. His eyes were locked on the inside of the shop. It was a music shop. It didn't look like the other stores on the street. Those stores had bright flashing signs and sales posters taped to the glass. This shop was different. The window was clear and spotless. Inside, everything was calm. The light was soft and warm, glowing down from the ceiling. There were no bright colors, just shining wood and brass. In the very center of the room stood the piano. It was huge. It was a grand piano, black and glossy. It looked like a giant beast made of black glass. The lid was propped open, reflecting the golden lights. To Toby, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. It wasn't just an instrument, it was a portal to a different world. Toby reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was greasy and the edges were torn. He handled it like it was made of gold. He unfolded it carefully. It was a page he had ripped out of an old library book. The book had been about music theory, but the cover was missing, and the library was throwing it away. Toby had rescued it from the bin just in time. The page was covered with black dots and lines. It showed a picture of a piano keyboard. Toby stared at the picture, then looked up at the real piano through the glass. He traced his finger over the paper keys. Middle C D E F. He tried to imagine what it would feel like to press those keys down. He imagined the sound they would make. Not just a noise, but a note. A clear, singing note that would cut through the air. A man walked by Toby on the sidewalk. The man was wearing a heavy wool coat and carrying a briefcase. He bumped into Toby's shoulder, hard, without saying sorry. Toby stumbled back a step but quickly regained his balance. He didn't look at the man. He was used to being invisible. People on the street didn't see a poor kid. They saw an obstacle. He turned his attention back to the window. Inside the shop, a man in a suit was showing a woman a violin. The shop was carpeted, so they moved silently. It looked like they were floating. The shop owner, a tall man with glasses, smiled politely. He looked calm and clean. His hands were smooth. Toby looked at his own hands. They were dirty. His fingernails had black grit under them, and there was a permanent stain of ink on his thumb from the odd jobs he did at the local mechanic shop just to earn a few dollars for dinner. He rubbed his hands on his shirt, trying to clean them, but the dirt didn't go away. "Come on," he whispered to himself. "Just look." He pressed his face closer to the glass. The glass felt cold against his forehead. It separated two different universes. On this side, there was dirt, noise, hunger, and rushing. On that side, there was order, peace, and beauty. It wasn't just about money. It was about how people lived in there. They took their time. They appreciated things. Toby watched the shop owner open a case. He took out a silver trumpet. It sparkled under the lights. Even from the sidewalk, Toby could see how perfect it was. He wondered what the brass would smell like. He wondered if the piano smelled like old wood and polish. He didn't want to buy anything. He knew he couldn't. The money in his pocket was for a loaf of bread and maybe a carton of milk. He just wanted to be near the music. He felt a tightness in his chest, a longing that hurt. It was a physical pain, like a hunger that food couldn't fix. A loud bus roared past, shaking the ground under Toby's feet. The noise was deafening. For a second, the vibration of the bus blurred the view through the glass. Toby squeezed his eyes shut and blocked his ears, waiting for the bus to pass. When the noise faded, he opened his eyes again. The shop was still there. The silence inside seemed even heavier now compared to the street. It was a safe place. A place where sounds were created on purpose, not just accidental noise. Toby looked at his greasy paper again. He had memorized the diagrams. He knew which keys made which chords. He tapped his fingers on his thigh, silently. He hummed a very quiet tune. It was a melody he heard in a movie once, a long time ago. He never forgot it. He played it in his head whenever things got too hard at home. It was his way of escaping. The sun was starting to go down. The shadows on the street grew longer. The street lights flickered on. The shop lights inside seemed to glow brighter. The piano looked like it was glowing from within. Toby sighed. His breath made a small fog on the window. He wiped it away with his sleeve, clearing a circle to see through again. I should go, he thought. Ma will be worrying. But his feet didn't move. They felt like they were stuck to the concrete. He was glued to the spot, drawn by the magnetic pull of the piano. He felt like if he walked away, the magic would disappear, and he would just be a hungry kid on a dark street again. Inside, the shop owner walked to the back of the store. He went through a curtain. The couple with the violin moved to the counter to pay. The front of the shop was empty for a moment. The piano sat there alone. Untouched. Waiting. Toby stared at the keyboard. It looked so close. Just a few feet of air and a sheet of glass separated his dirty fingers from those ivory keys. He imagined walking in. He imagined the sound of the carpet under his shoes. He imagined sitting on the bench. He imagined his hands hovering over the keys, ready to play. He knew he couldn't go in. He wasn't allowed. He didn't belong there. He looked at his reflection in the glass. He saw a small, messy boy with messy hair who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He looked nothing like the people who shopped in there. But the paper in his pocket burned against his leg. It was his map. It was his ticket. He knew the notes. He understood the language. He felt like he had more right to be there than the people who just bought the instruments to put them in their empty living rooms. He took a deep breath. The air on the street smelled like burnt pretzels and diesel. He wished he could smell the polish. He wished he could hear the hammers striking the strings. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing and shouting. They pushed past Toby, jostling him. He didn't fight back. He just steadied himself and kept looking through the window. He was a statue in a river of people. Everyone was moving, rushing to get somewhere. Only Toby was still. He focused on the pedals of the piano. The gold pedals shone. He knew what they did. The soft pedal, the sustain pedal. He had read about them. He knew that music wasn't just about the keys you hit, it was about the silence in between. It was about the timing. Toby clenched his jaw. He felt a sudden spark of determination. He didn't know where it came from. Maybe it was because he was so tired of being on the outside looking in. Maybe he just needed to know if the paper was real. He wanted to know if the diagrams in his head actually made a sound in the real world. He took a step closer to the glass entrance. The automatic doors were made of strong, transparent material. There was a metal handle on the side. It looked cold. He watched the shop owner come back from the back room. The owner had a box in his hands. He walked toward the couple at the counter. He wasn't looking at the door. The street noise seemed to fade away. Toby's heartbeat got louder. Thump thump. Thump thump. It drowned out the cars. He looked at the handle. He looked at the piano. He looked at his dirty hand. He squeezed the paper in his pocket one last time. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a story if he got caught. He just had a need. A need to be closer to the beauty. A need to touch the magic, just for a second. He just wanted to see if the music would come out for him, or if it only reserved its songs for the rich people. The store owner walked with a purpose. He held a velvet box in one hand and a polishing cloth in the other. His name was Mr. Vance, but Toby didn't know that. To Toby, he was just the man who guarded the treasure. Mr. Vance was smiling at the couple near the counter, a practiced, polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was talking about the varnish on the violin, using words like heritage and craftsmanship. The woman in the expensive coat nodded, looking impressed, while the man checked his wristwatch, clearly ready to leave. Toby stayed pressed against the glass, watching them like a hawk. He wasn't interested in the violin. He only had eyes for the piano in the center of the room. The atmosphere inside the shop was so thick with silence that it felt heavy compared to the street. Toby saw a young man in the corner trying out a guitar, but he was wearing headphones. Toby could see the man's fingers moving, but he couldn't hear the music. It was like watching a movie with the sound turned off. It made Toby feel even more isolated. He was standing in a roar of traffic, staring into a tomb of quiet. Mr. Vance suddenly stopped talking. He held up a finger to the couple, indicating he would be right back. He needed to get a specific bow from the back storage room to complete the sale. He turned on his heel and walked toward a heavy velvet curtain at the back of the shop. As he passed the grand piano, he didn't even look at it. To him, it was just merchandise, a very expensive piece of furniture that needed to be dusted. Toby watched the curtain sway as Mr. Vance disappeared behind it. The couple at the counter turned away, looking at a display of sheet music on the wall. The guitarist with the headphones closed his eyes, lost in his own world. The front of the shop was completely unguarded. Toby's heart gave a strange jolt. It felt like the drop on a roller coaster. He looked down at his shoes. They were covered in gray dust from the sidewalk. He looked at the clean, white carpet inside the shop. It was a bright line he wasn't supposed to cross. Just a quick look, he told himself. Just to hear the silence closer. He knew it was risky. He knew he could get in trouble. But the pull of the piano was stronger than his fear. It felt like a magnetic force was tugging at the center of his chest. He took a shaky breath and stepped away from the window. The entrance wasn't a big wooden door. It was a modern, sliding glass door that usually stayed locked. It had a metal handle on the side. Toby reached out, his fingers hovering over the metal. It was cold. Just then, a delivery man carrying a heavy box of sheet music exited the shop. He used his hip to push the bar that opened the door. He walked out, turning his head to the side to shout something to a driver down the street. The glass door slid open smoothly and stayed open for a few seconds before the hydraulic mechanism tried to pull it shut again. That was the gap. It was a tiny, 3-second window where the barrier between the two worlds was broken. Toby didn't think. He didn't plan. His body moved on instinct. He slipped through the opening just before the door sealed itself shut with a soft click. Suddenly, the noise of the city was cut off. It wasn't gone completely. He could still hear the muffled rumble of engines and the occasional distant siren, but it sounded like it was happening underwater. The air inside smelled completely different. It didn't smell like exhaust or trash. It smelled of lemon wax, old paper, and that distinct, sharp scent of dried wood. It was the smell of order. Toby froze just inside the entrance. His back was pressed against the wall near a rack of guitar picks. His heart was hammering so hard against his ribs that he was sure the people in the shop could hear it. He looked down at his feet. His dirty sneakers were now resting on the pristine carpet. He felt a surge of guilt, like he was contaminating a holy place. He looked around quickly. The couple was still looking at the sheet music, their backs to him. The guitarist was still wearing headphones. Mr. Vance was still behind the curtain. No one had seen him enter. He was invisible again. He took a step forward. Then another. The carpet was so thick that his shoes made absolutely no sound. It felt like walking on a cloud. He moved slowly, carefully, trying to make himself small. He hugged the wall, passing by shelves filled with shiny trumpets and silver flutes. They gleamed under the spotlights. He wanted to touch them, to see if the metal was cold, but he didn't dare. He kept his hands balled into fists inside his pockets. He was moving toward the center of the room. The piano seemed to get bigger with every step he took. It sat there like a black ship in a calm sea. The lid was open, revealing the tight, golden strings and the felt-covered hammers inside. It looked complicated and mysterious. Toby's mouth felt dry. He swallowed hard. He was doing something wrong. He knew that. If he got caught, they would yell at him. They might call the police. A poor kid sneaking into a fancy shop, it wouldn't look good. But the hunger inside him was louder than the fear. He needed to be near it. He needed to prove to himself that it was real. He reached the edge of the rug where the piano sat on a small raised platform. He stopped and looked at the keys. They were white rectangles with sharp black edges. They looked clean and untouched. He imagined the thousands of notes that had been played on them, the songs that had been born right there. He looked over his shoulder again. The curtain was still. The couple was laughing softly at something in a music book. The shop was quiet, peaceful, and completely unaware that a boy from the street had invaded its sanctuary. Toby stepped up onto the platform. The floor here was polished black wood, not carpet. His shoes squeaked slightly, a tiny squeak that sounded like a gunshot to him. He flinched, stopping dead. He held his breath, his eyes darting to the curtain. Nothing happened. No one came out. He let his breath out slowly. He was standing right next to the piano now. It towered over him. The polished black surface reflected his face back at him, but he looked distorted, like a ghost. He could see the grease on his forehead and the smudge of dirt on his cheek. He looked so out of place here. He looked like a mistake. But he couldn't turn back now. He was too close. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the greasy paper. He unfolded it with shaking hands. He looked at the diagram of the keyboard, then at the real thing in front of him. It matched perfectly. The theory on the paper was real. It existed in this room. He felt a strange sensation in his fingertips. They were tingling. He looked at his hands. They were rough and red from the cold. His knuckles were scraped. These hands were used to carrying heavy boxes, to scrubbing floors, to digging through trash for recyclables. They were workers' hands. They were not meant for ivory keys. But as he stood there, a thought formed in his mind. The piano didn't have eyes. It didn't know who he was. It didn't know how much money his family had. It didn't know where he lived or what he ate for dinner. The piano only knew vibration. If he pressed a key, it would sing. It didn't matter if it was a king or a beggar pressing it. The note would be the same. That thought gave him a tiny bit of courage. He wasn't a trespasser anymore. He was a musician. Or at least, he wanted to be. He wasn't here to steal something he could sell. He was here to give something. He was here to offer the music that was trapped inside his head. He stepped closer. His legs were trembling slightly. The bench was there, a shiny black seat with a cushioned top. He didn't sit down. He didn't dare take that much liberty. He just stood in front of the keys, looming over them like a conductor. He looked at the sheet music on the rack. It was open to a complex piece, full of black notes running up and down the staff. It looked like a swarm of ants. Toby couldn't read all of it. He only knew the basics from his rescued book. But he knew the melody in his heart. He knew a song that was simple, a song that was sad. The silence in the shop pressed against his ears. It was waiting. The piano was waiting. Toby felt a lump form in his throat. It was a mix of fear and a profound, aching joy. He had never been this close to a real instrument. This was the moment his life had been leading to, however unlikely it seemed. Mr. Vance was still gone. The couple was still distracted. Toby was alone with the music. He looked at the keys one last time. They were so white. So clean. He hesitated. The voice in his head that told him he wasn't good enough, that he was just a dirty street kid, screamed at him to leave. But another voice, a quieter, stronger voice, told him to reach out. Please, he whispered the word into the silence. Please work. He slowly pulled his right hand out of his pocket. He hovered it over the keys, his fingers curved just like the pictures showed. He was terrified that if he touched it, he would break the spell. He was terrified that the magic would vanish and he would just be a boy touching a piece of furniture. But he had to know. He had to take the risk. His hand didn't shake anymore. As his fingers hovered over the white keys, a strange calmness washed over him. The noise of the street, the worry about being caught, the cold in his bones, it all faded away until there was nothing left but the black and white world in front of him. He looked at the fallboard, the piece of wood that covered the keys when the piano wasn't being used. It had a logo on it in gold letters. He didn't know what the letters meant, but they looked fancy. He looked at his own reflection in the black lacquer to the side of the keys. He looked small. He looked messy. But for the first time all day, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump, but he knew there was water below to catch him. Toby took a deep breath. The air smelled like dust and polish. He closed his eyes for a split second and pictured the diagram in his pocket. He visualized the middle C. It was the white key just to the left of the group of two black keys. He opened his eyes and looked down. There it was. He slowly lowered his index finger. His nail was bitten down to the quick, and there was a line of grease on his skin. The white key looked pristine, untouched by the world. He hesitated one last time. This was the line. Once he touched it, there was no going back. He was no longer just looking, he was interacting. His fingertip made contact. It was cool and smooth, harder than he expected it to be. It felt solid, like a rock, but with a tiny bit of give. He didn't press it down yet. He just rested his finger there, feeling the connection. He was touching something that cost more money than his family would see in 10 years. He was touching something that belonged to a different class of people. But the key didn't reject him. It didn't scream. It didn't alarm. It just sat there under his finger, waiting. Toby shifted his weight. He looked at the back of the shop again. The curtain was still. The couple was still talking. He had to be quick. He couldn't play a whole song. He just wanted to hear one note. He needed to know if the sound in his head matched the sound in the real world. He pressed down. There was a slight resistance, and then the key went down. A felt hammer inside the piano struck a string. The sound wasn't loud, but it was perfect. It was a clear, bell-like tone that seemed to vibrate right through the floorboards and up his legs. It hung in the air for a moment, pure and beautiful. Toby's eyes went wide. It was better than he had imagined. It wasn't just a noise, it was a living thing. The note seemed to spin in the quiet air of the shop, swirling around the ceiling before fading away. He didn't pull his hand back. The sound had unlocked something in him. The fear vanished, replaced by a desperate need to hear more. One note wasn't enough. It was like eating one crumb when you were starving. He looked at the black key just above the white one. C sharp. He pressed it with his middle finger. Then the next white key, D. He used his thumb. Then E. Then F. He wasn't playing a song yet. He was just walking his fingers up the scale, one by one. Ping, 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 ping. Each note was distinct. Each note was crystal clear. The piano was massive, and it filled the room with sound even when he played softly. He realized that this machine was built to sing, and all it needed was someone to wake it up. He stopped at the top of the scale and looked at his hands. They were moving on their own now. His left hand, which had been dangling by his side, suddenly felt jealous. It wanted to be part of this too. Toby remembered the music from the movie. The sad, slow melody that lived in his head. He knew it started with a chord. A chord was 3 notes played together. He placed his thumb on a G, his middle finger on a B, and his pinky on a D. He took a breath and pressed them all down at once. The sound was richer, deeper. It filled his chest. It sounded like a heartbeat. To Toby, it sounded like the feeling of missing someone you love. It was beautiful. He closed his eyes. He forgot where he was. He forgot about the dirt on his shoes. He forgot about the shopkeeper behind the curtain. In his mind, he wasn't in a fancy shop on a busy street. He was floating in a dark, warm ocean. The music was the water holding him up. He started to play. He didn't know the notes by name, but he knew the shape of the melody. He played the simple opening phrase of Clair de Lune. He fumbled a few times. His fingers slipped because he was nervous, and his hands were stiff from the cold. But when he hit a wrong note, he just kept going. He didn't stop to fix it. He let the mistakes blend in. The piano was forgiving. He was playing quietly, trying to keep the volume down so he wouldn't be heard. But the quietness of the song made it even more intense. It was a whisper, not a shout. It was a secret shared between the boy and the machine. He swayed slightly as he played. His body relaxed. The tension in his shoulders melted away. He was no longer the poor kid who hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. He was no longer the kid who got bullied at school. He was a musician. He was an artist. For these few seconds, he was important. The melody flowed out of him. It wasn't perfect technique. His wrists were too stiff, and his fingers were a little clumsy. But there was a raw emotion in the way he hit the keys. He wasn't just trying to make a pretty sound, he was trying to pour all his sadness, all his loneliness, and all his hopes into the instrument. He was playing like this was his last chance to speak. The notes floated through the shop. They drifted past the shelves of guitars. They drifted past the counter. They reached the velvet curtain at the back of the room. Toby lost track of time. He didn't know if he had been playing for 10 seconds or 10 minutes. He was in a trance. He moved his left hand up to the treble section to pick out a harmony he had hummed in his head 1,000 times. He held the sustain pedal down with his foot. He had seen people do that in pictures. It made the notes blend together, creating a wash of sound that was like mist. The music was so simple, but it was so full of feeling. It was the sound of a dream. It was the sound of looking at the stars and wishing you could fly. He felt a tear run down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He just let it fall. He was happy. He felt a sense of peace that he had never felt before. The chaos of the world, the unfairness of it all, seemed to disappear. There was only the vibration of the strings against his fingertips. He played the phrase again, slower this time. He wanted to savor it. He pressed the keys gently, almost caressing them. He was treating the piano with the reverence that people usually reserve for holy things. He knew that this moment was a gift. He knew it was stolen, but it didn't feel like a crime. It felt like a miracle. As he reached the end of the melody, his hand slowed down. The notes became further apart. The silence between them grew longer. He was running out of courage, and he was running out of time. He knew he couldn't stay forever. The magic couldn't last. He hovered his hands over the final chord. He could feel the vibration of the previous notes fading into the wood of the piano. He took one last breath of the lemon-scented air. He was about to play the last note when he heard a sound from the back of the room. It was a soft footstep on the carpet. Toby's fingers froze. He didn't press the final key. His hands were still hovering over the keyboard, suspended in mid-air. The trance shattered instantly. The real world came rushing back in. The cold air, the dirt on his clothes, the fear of getting caught, it all hit him at once. He realized he wasn't alone anymore. He had been so lost in the music that he hadn't heard the curtain move. He hadn't heard the shop owner walk out. He stood there, trembling, his hands still raised over the keys, waiting for the shout that would surely come. The beautiful silence of the shop was gone, replaced by the pounding of his own heart. He felt a hot flush of shame crawl up his neck. He was caught. He had broken the rules. He had touched something that wasn't his. He waited to be grabbed, to be yelled at, to be thrown out onto the hard pavement. But for that second, nobody spoke. The only sound in the room was the fading echo of the music he had just created. Toby's hands were shaking. They hovered over the keys, trembling like leaves in the wind. The silence that followed his playing wasn't peaceful anymore, it was heavy and suffocating. He felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. He kept his back to the rest of the shop, terrified to turn around and see the anger he knew was waiting for him. He could feel a presence behind him. It wasn't a ghost or a shadow, it was the weight of authority. The floorboards behind him creaked. It was a soft sound, but to Toby, it was as loud as a crack of thunder. He squeezed his eyes shut. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to melt into the carpet and seep through the floorboards, far away from this moment. He had broken the rules. He had touched the merchandise. He was just a dirty kid from the street, and now he was going to pay the price. He expected a rough hand on his shoulder. He expected shouting. He expected to be grabbed by the collar and dragged out. Hey! The voice wasn't a scream, but it was sharp. It cut through the air like a knife. Toby flinched violently. His hands jerked away from the keys as if he had been burned. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. He almost fell, but he caught himself on the edge of the piano bench. The bench slid across the polished wood with a screech that made him wince. He turned around slowly, pressing his back against the side of the piano. His heart was hammering so fast it hurt. He looked up, expecting to see a security guard or an angry manager with a red face. It was Mr. Vance. The shop owner was standing a few feet away. He was holding a velvet box in one hand and a fine violin bow in the other. He had walked out from the back room just in time to hear the last fading notes of the melody. The couple near the counter had stopped talking. They were both staring at Toby. The woman had her hand over her mouth. The man with the watch wasn't looking at his wrist anymore, his eyes were fixed on the boy by the piano. For a second, nobody moved. The shop was frozen in time. The air conditioning hummed softly, a stark contrast to the emotion that had just filled the room. Toby felt small. He felt exposed. He could feel the dirt on his face and the holes in his clothes. He felt like a stain on the clean, perfect world of the music shop. I'm sorry, Toby stammered. His voice was barely a whisper. It cracked with fear. I didn't mean to. I was just looking. He expected Mr. Vance to explode. He expected the man to drop the bow and come charging over. But Mr. Vance didn't move. He just stood there, his eyebrows furrowed together. He wasn't looking at Toby's clothes. He wasn't looking at the dirt on the floor. He was looking at Toby's hands. He was looking at the fingers that had just coaxed such a heartbreakingly beautiful sound out of his most expensive instrument. The couple walked closer. The woman stepped carefully around a display stand. She looked from Toby to the piano, and then back to Toby again. Did you just play that?" she asked. Her voice wasn't mean. It was full of wonder. Toby didn't know what to say. He pressed his back harder against the cold piano. He looked at the door, calculating if he could run, but his legs felt like jelly. He was trapped. I just touched it," Toby mumbled. He looked down at his sneakers. "I'll go. I'm sorry. I'm leaving." He started to shuffle sideways, edging away from them. He was ready to bolt. He wanted the safety of the noisy, dirty street. He understood the street. People yelled there, people pushed there, but at least he knew what to expect. This quiet judgment was terrifying. "Wait," Mr. Vance said. The shop owner took a step forward. He set the velvet box down on a nearby table with great care. He didn't take his eyes off Toby. "You play with your heart, not your hands," Mr. Vance said. His voice was low and serious. It lacked the fake politeness he used with customers. It sounded real. "I've been selling pianos for 20 years. I hear professionals play every single day. Men with degrees and fancy suits. They play with perfection, but they don't play like that. Toby stopped moving. He looked up, confused. He didn't understand what the man was saying. He was waiting to get kicked out, but the kick wasn't coming. The couple stopped too. The room felt different now. The tension was shifting. It wasn't the tension of a crime being committed, it was the tension of a mystery being revealed. The man in the suit walked up to the piano. He reached out and touched the glossy lid, running his finger along the edge. "My wife plays," he said, looking at Toby. "She takes lessons. She practices for an hour every day. But that, what you just played, that had a soul." "What is that song?" It's just a song I heard," Toby said quietly. He was trembling less now, but he still felt like he was on the edge of a cliff. "I don't know the name." Mr. Vance walked closer. He towered over Toby. He was a big man, usually very intimidating to customers who wanted a discount. But now, he looked down at the boy with a strange expression. It was a mix of curiosity and respect. He noticed the paper sticking out of Toby's pocket. He saw the grease stains on it. "Can you read music?" Mr. Vance asked. Toby shook his head. "No, sir. I just look at the pictures. In the book. I try to remember where the notes go." "Show me," Mr. Vance said. He pointed to the piano keys with the bow he was still holding. "Play that melody again. Just one more time." Toby looked at the door, then at the shop owner, then at the piano. His fear was fighting with his love for the music. The music was winning. He wanted to play. He needed to play. The first time had been an accident, a stolen moment. This time, he was being invited. "I'll get it dirty," Toby whispered, looking at his hands. Mr. Vance let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't a mocking laugh. "Boy, ivory can be cleaned. That sound you made, that can't be bought. Go on." Toby turned back to the piano. He felt the eyes of the three adults burning into his back. He felt the pressure. He took a deep breath to steady his nerves. He lifted his hands again. They were still shaking, but he tried to control them. He placed his fingers on the keys. The cool surface calmed him down. He closed his eyes for a moment to block out the room, to block out the fancy clothes and the clean floor. He went back to the place in his head where the music lived. He thought about the quiet times, the lonely times, the feeling of looking at the stars and dreaming of a better life. He pressed down on the keys. The melody started again. Clair de Lune. It was simple and slow. Because he was nervous, he played it even slower than before. Every note rang out clearly. He put his weight into the keys, making the piano sing. He didn't worry about the technique. He didn't worry about his posture. He just played. He let the sadness flow out of him. He thought about his mom working late, about the cold apartment, about the empty fridge. He poured all of that hunger into the instrument. The shop went completely silent. The man with the watch took a step back, his eyes wide. The woman stopped breathing for a moment. Even Mr. Vance stood perfectly still, the bow in his hand forgotten. The sound wasn't just notes anymore. It was a story. It was a story about a boy who had nothing but had everything to give. It was raw and unpolished, but it was honest. Toby hit a wrong note in the middle, a jarring sound that made him flinch, but he kept going. He didn't stop to apologize. He let the mistake be part of the story. It made the music real. It made it human. He reached the end of the phrase. This time, He didn't stop abruptly. He let the final chord fade out naturally. He held his fingers on the keys, feeling the vibration dying away under his fingertips. He waited for the silence to return, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was full. He lifted his hands and stepped back from the bench. He turned around to face them. He was terrified of what they would say. He felt exposed, like he had shown them his diary or read them a secret letter. The silence stretched on. It lasted 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Nobody spoke. The traffic outside the window seemed to have paused. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, cutting through the quiet. The three adults just stood there, looking at him. The woman had tears in her eyes. The man had his mouth slightly open. Mr. Vance was looking at the piano, then back at the boy, shaking his head very slowly. Toby gripped the hem of his shirt. "I'm sorry," he said again, thinking the silence meant they hated it. "I'll go now." He turned toward the glass door. He wanted to run before they started yelling. "Don't," Mr. Vance said. The single word stopped Toby in his tracks. "Don't go," Mr. Vance said. He walked over to the piano and put the bow on the felt. He looked at Toby with a serious expression. "You have a gift. And you learned that from a greasy piece of paper." Toby nodded slowly. Mr. Vance looked at the couple. They nodded at him. The shop owner sighed, a long, heavy sigh that seemed to blow away the pretension of the shop. He looked at Toby's dirty shoes, then at his face. "You don't have to go," Mr. Vance said gently. "Not yet. We need to talk about that paper in your pocket." Toby stood near the glass door, his hand on the metal handle, frozen. The silence in the shop wasn't scary anymore. It was waiting for him. The whole world had shifted on its axis in the span of a 3-minute song. He let go of the door handle and turned back around. He was still just a poor boy with dirty hands, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was standing on solid ground. Toby let his hand fall away from the door handle. The metal was cold, but the air around him felt suddenly warmer. He stood there, caught between the life he knew and this strange, new moment he had stumbled into. His heart was still racing, but the tight knot of fear in his chest was beginning to loosen, just a little. He looked at the three adults. They weren't looking at him like he was a criminal anymore. They were looking at him like he was a person. Mr. Vance walked around the counter and leaned against it, crossing his arms. He didn't look angry. He looked thoughtful, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You said you learned from a picture?" Mr. Vance asked. He nodded toward Toby's pocket. "Can I see it?" Toby hesitated. He was protective of the paper. It was the only music book he owned. It was his treasure. But Mr. Vance had asked nicely. And he hadn't yelled about the piano yet. Slowly, Toby reached into his pocket. He pulled out the folded, greasy pamphlet. He unfolded it carefully, treating the torn edges with respect, and held it out. The shop owner took it. He handled it gently, despite the stains. He smoothed it out on the glass countertop. The couple came closer to look. It was just a single sheet, yellowed with age, covered in smudges and ink marks. There was a diagram of a keyboard at the top, and some handwritten notes in the margins where Toby had tried to copy the symbols. "Where did you get this?" the woman asked softly. She had a kind face, the kind that reminded Toby of a teacher he once liked. "The library," Toby said. "They were throwing it away. The cover was ripped off." Mr. Vance looked at the paper closely. You taught yourself to read the staff just from this one page. I looked at the dots, Toby explained, gaining a little confidence. I saw that when the dot goes up, the sound goes up. When it goes down, the sound goes down. I practiced the shapes on my leg when I was sitting on the bus. The man in the suit shook his head. That is incredible intuition. Most people need years of lessons to understand the relationship between the staff and the keyboard. Toby looked down at his shoes. He didn't feel incredible. He just felt like a kid who loved music. I just like the sound. It makes things quiet inside. Mr. Vance looked at the piano, then at Toby, and then at the couple. He seemed to come to a decision. He pushed himself away from the counter and walked over to the piano again. He picked up the velvet cloth he had brought out earlier. "Do you know how to tune a piano?" Mr. Vance asked. Toby shook his head. "No, sir." "Do you know why we keep the lid open?" Mr. Vance tapped the wooden prop holding the lid up. "It projects the sound." "You knew that? You didn't close it? You let the piano sing." Toby just nodded. He didn't know the technical reason, he just knew it sounded better that way. Mr. Vance sighed, a sound that was part amazement, part sadness. "You know, I have students come in here. Their parents pay me a lot of money. They have the best shoes, the newest clothes, and the newest gadgets. They sit at this piano, and they play the notes perfectly. Not a single mistake. But it sounds like a typewriter. It's just noise. It has no feeling." He looked Toby right in the eye. "You played 3 wrong notes in that melody. But it was the most beautiful thing I've heard in this shop in 10 years. Toby felt a flush rise to his cheeks. He didn't know what to say to that. He felt proud, but he also felt shy. It was strange to be praised by someone like Mr. Vance. It was like being complimented by a king. The woman stepped forward. She reached into her purse. Toby flinched slightly, thinking she was getting her phone to call security or maybe getting money to pay for the damage. But she pulled out a business card. She held it out to him. "My name is Eleanor," she said. "I'm not a musician, but I support the Arts Center downtown. We have a program for kids who have talent but who don't have the means." She looked at his clothes, but not with judgment. "We have teachers. We have pianos. You could come there. You wouldn't have to pay." Toby stared at the card. It was white and crisp, with gold lettering. He didn't take it. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "A program for him, it's real," the man next to her said. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Please, take it." Toby slowly reached out. His dirty fingers took the clean card. He held it like it was made of glass. He didn't put it in his greasy pocket, he held it tight in his hand. I don't have a way to get there," Toby whispered. "And I have to help my mom after school." "You worry about the music," Mr. Vance said suddenly. "We can worry about the rest." The shop owner walked back to the counter. He opened the register drawer. Toby thought he was going to get a refund or change, but Mr. Vance took out something else. He took out a small, laminated pass. "This is a key to the back door," Mr. Vance said, placing it on the counter. "The shop closes at 6. But the back room, it has a small upright piano. Not as nice as this one." He gestured to the grand. "But it works. I come in early to do paperwork. Around 7 in the morning. If you can get here before school, you can practice." No charge. Toby's jaw dropped. He looked at the key, then at Mr. Vance. You trust me after I broke in. You didn't break in, Mr. Vance corrected him. You walked in. And you touched the instrument with respect. That is rare. I can teach you the notes. I can teach you the scales. But I cannot teach someone how to feel the music like you do. That is something you were born with. It would be a crime to let that go to waste. Toby felt the tears come back. He blinked them away rapidly. He didn't want to cry in front of them. He didn't want to look weak. But this was too much. Just 10 minutes ago, he was a starving kid looking through a window. Now, he had a card for a school and a key to a shop. His life had changed in an instant. And all it took was the courage to touch one key. I have to go, Toby said suddenly. He looked at the clock on the wall. My mom is waiting. Of course, Mr. Vance said. Take the card. Keep the paper. Toby looked at the greasy pamphlet still on the counter. You keep it, Toby said. It belongs in a music shop. Mr. Vance smiled. He picked up the paper and carefully placed it under the glass countertop, right next to the cash register. It looked like a museum exhibit now. A holy relic. Toby turned toward the glass door. He walked slowly, feeling the weight of the card in his hand. He pushed the handle. The cool evening air rushed in to meet him, bringing with it the sounds of the city, the honking, the shouting, the roar of the engines. He stepped out onto the sidewalk. The glass door hissed shut behind him, sealing the quiet, golden world back inside. Toby stood on the concrete. The cold wind hit his face, whipping his hair. A bus roared past, spewing smoke. A man rushed by, bumping into Toby's shoulder without apologizing. Nothing had changed on the street. It was still the same hard, noisy place. But Toby felt different. He looked at the reflection of the shop in the window. He saw the grand piano shining in the distance. It wasn't just a piece of furniture anymore. It was a friend. He looked down at his hand. He opened his fingers. There, resting in his dirty palm, was the crisp white business card. It was real. He put the card carefully into his shirt pocket, right against his heart. He buttoned the flap to make sure it wouldn't fall out. He didn't feel the hunger in his stomach as much anymore. He didn't feel the cold as sharply. Toby turned and started walking home. He didn't run. He walked with a little bit of a bounce in his step. He passed a trash can on the corner. He stopped for a second and looked at it. He thought about the life he used to have, the life where he only looked for scraps. Then he touched the pocket over his heart, turned up his collar against the wind, and kept walking. He was still poor. He still had holes in his shoes. But now, he had a song. And now, he had a place to play it. The city was loud, but for the first time, Toby wasn't listening to the noise. He was listening to the music in his head, and it was the most beautiful sound in the world. He disappeared into the crowd, just another kid on the street, but he was carrying a secret magic that no one could take away from him.